At the time of the making of this film, large portions of the European continent as well as North America are going through a phase of heat waves and severe dryness and drought. And like many others, I found myself longing for a milder climate, as it could still be found in some forests in the mountains. And I decided to once again leave the city life behind for a few days and visit my old hometown in East Westphalia in Germany. And with me I brought a small hydropower device that I have been working on for a while. In this video I will show its conception, building process, and eventual field test in a creek close to where I grew up. And since I just couldn't get enough of that mild forest climate, we're also going to reclaim a derelict building for a post-apocalyptic overnighter in the woods. So come and follow me along for some inventing, exploration, and bushcrafting. So what's the idea with that hydropower device anyway? Well, see, I grew up right next to a small creek, and as kids we would play in that creek all day, building dams, looking for treasure, like empty glass bottles that had been made long before we were born. Even as a child, I always wanted to build a water wheel, maybe to produce electricity with it, and I remember several failed attempts from back in those days. However, when I visited my parents a few weeks ago to make my film about the solar e-bike trailer, I remembered all that and decided to tackle this issue next time I'd return. So in other words, I wanted to build a small portable turbine or water wheel that could simply be used in an ordinary creek or small stream, as you find them almost everywhere. And I started to do some research about historic water wheels as they were used in this country in the past. And of course there are different types, defined by where and how the water is falling or flowing into the wheel. With overshot water wheels, the water is falling down from a level higher than the wheel itself. And then there are also breastshot wheels with the incoming water at the height of the center of the wheel. But since I wasn't planning to divert a creek and build a reservoir and all that, I would have to build a water wheel of the undershot water wheel or the stream wheel type. Because of the low velocity of the typical creek, I was certain that some height difference, unlike in a stream wheel, would be needed to make a wheel work properly. And that's why I was aiming at building an undershot wheel, in German unterschlächtiges Wasserrad. Prior to the 18th century, the driving surfaces of these wheels used to be straight, and only after that, different inventors started to use curved surfaces to increase the efficiency of these wheels. In Germany, one type of these wheels is referred to as a Poncelet wheel, named after the inventor of that name. And I found some historic drawings of a Poncelet wheel that I decided to base my own prototype on. So what I basically did is to interpret the measurements of these historic wheels and translate them into rules of thumb for the number of driving surfaces and different radii for the curvature. Since I want to use the 3D printer here, I decided to use an overall diameter of 40 centimeters and then stack 3 wheel sections on top of each other so that the driving surfaces would be supported every 7 centimeters or so. I figured that these thin surfaces would otherwise get too flexible and flimsy. The 40 centimeters diameter was chosen because the 3D printer I'm using can print parts of an area of 20 by 20 centimeters, and this would allow me to separate each wheel into 4 parts that could be glued together. These quarter sections are designed in such a way that 4 identical prints form one wheel section of about 7 centimeters thickness. They are also designed in a way to minimize the need for support structures during the printing process. An inner radius is also added, so that the water won't flow inside the wheel close to where the generators will be installed. The quarter sections fit together very tightly, but some room was left to accommodate superglue. Eventually, 12 identical parts were printed and glued together to form 3 wheel sections, and they in turn would later also be glued together. Many more of these wheel sections could be made and connected to each other. Around the center of the wheel I decided to leave this octagonal opening that would be big enough to accommodate small generators or allow a connection to an external generator in the future. For the first test here, I figured that it would be sufficient to simply install 2 used bicycle hub dynamos that I had lying around anyway. An octagonal form was designed that fits right around the hub, while the octagonal shape at one end of this Shimano hub fits right into this opening. On the other side, a sort of lid or retaining ring is glued onto it to hold the dynamo in place. The cool thing is that these hubs don't have to be connected to the wheel permanently. They simply slide inside, and now the rotation of the wheel is coupled to the hub. I made 2 of these hub parts for both ends of the wheel. To close the wheel on its open side, 4 end pieces needed to be printed as well, and they were also eventually glued to the wheel, and then it took some time for the glue to harden. In the meantime, I had left my own workshop to drive to my parents' home, and what you see here is an old woodworking bench in my dad's workshop, and the remaining work needed to be done here under, let's say, less than ideal circumstances. These aluminium extrusions here are left over from a broken 3D printer that a viewer had given to me some time ago, and thanks again for that. The printer itself wasn't really that useful to me, but its parts will live on in other projects. I had to cut some of the extrusions to a different length, but other than that, it worked out perfectly. I built this lightweight, height-adjustable frame that is rather easy to carry around as well. The height adjustment is important because I have no idea how deep this wheel has to dip into the water. Also, I don't know how deep the water will be at that specific point. The axles of those hubs, by the way, are connected to plastic pieces that only then in turn connect to the aluminium frame. I did this to insulate the enclosures of the hubs from the aluminium. And this was important so that the 2 generators would be able to work electrically completely independent of each other. It's still a big open question if the water wheel will even work mechanically though, meaning it's not guaranteed that it will even spin. That's our first and most important objective here. Secondarily, there are other questions like, will it still spin when a load is put on the wheel? For example, in the form of electric generators that need to supply electric energy. Most generators would also need a much higher rotational speed to generate useful voltages. The Hub Dynamos should be a good choice because they can run at very low rotational speed. Their power output will be very limited though. But that is not what this is about right now. It's about building a working water wheel and ideally produce some electric energy at all. And in order to make that even visible on video, I installed these LEDs here. They are basically like replacements for old-fashioned incandescent light bulbs for bicycles. And I connect them directly to the dynamos. So the moment of truth was getting close and I was anxious to see what would happen. So, as you can see, the water wheel works pretty well, and I think it's a thing of beauty. How small and unimportant this must seem, for me it's the fulfillment of a childhood dream. When I was playing here some 25 years ago, I wanted to see this happen, and it finally has. You can see the LEDs flashing. The reason why they light up in pulses is that these dynamos are little brushless generators that produce a low frequency alternating current, with the frequency of the current being a function of the rotational speed, while the LEDs act as half-wave rectifiers, lighting up only at either the positive or negative half-wave. I connected the LEDs in anti-parallel fashion so that we will get light flashes from both half-waves. As I said earlier in the video, I was aiming to build an undershot wheel here. This means that the water is flowing at a low level, but there still needs to be a height difference between incoming and outgoing water. This is why I chose this specific spot, where the water level makes a sudden drop. A water wheel that would work from the flow of the water alone is called a stream wheel. And as I mentioned before, I think that in a slow-moving creek like this, that alone would probably not be enough energy to do something like this. So what are we going to do with this idea in the future? Well, I will try to build a circuit that will allow me to charge a battery with this water wheel. Maybe I will build something bigger or connect other generators. But there actually will be the chance to build something much more powerful at a property that friends of mine bought not too long ago. But more about that in a future episode. Back in those days when I was also often playing down at that stream, another place that we sometimes came to was this derelict building here. Toy gun in one hand, walkie-talkie in the other. We'd spend all day in the hills and in the forest building little hideouts with whatever we could find. Rivaling groups of boys had places of their own, and raiding parties were commonplace. It was all good fun and probably the best childhood anyone could have had. But in our minds, these were adventures of grandiose proportions. But be that as it may, this place was in ruins even 30 years ago, and nothing much has changed. Garbage is scattered all around, and lots of empty beer cans and bottles of different varieties can be found here. But judging by the style and date codes, everything is almost 20 years old, like these cans with an expiration date from 2003. I think I even know the teenagers who left this year. Well, at least they were teenagers back then. I think this tiny building, whatever it was once built by the German railroad. But it has obviously been forgotten since it was abandoned more than 30 years ago. Since I've been seeing a lot of videos online where people do some bushcrafting and sleep outside in nature, I figured why not clean up this place, properly dispose of the garbage that others have left behind in a mindless way, and build a shelter here for an overnighter in the woods. I was just curious what I could do with not much more than what I could find around this place. After pulling out all these stinging nettles, I started to work myself through rotten pallets, trying not to step in their rusty old nails. Unlike a lot of things that were too decayed already to be of any future use, I found this green net here that might come in handy later. My next step was to clear the floor of all the rubble until I would hit a stone floor or a foundation. It was a lot of work and took many hours. But in the end, I saw that the floor was made of stones that had somehow been compacted into the soil. Since this was more of a spontaneous idea, I didn't have a lot of bushcrafting equipment at hand, so I went on a little shopping trip and tried to get the best I could find at some local garden supply and military surplus stores. This display does not represent a recommendation. I just bought these things and need to work with them to say if they're any good. Besides a backpack in the style of an old German army rucksack, I got myself some camping lamps, that yellow LED lamp I already had in my car, some replacement batteries for the lamps just in case, a thick tarp 2x3 meters, 200 meters of black paracord, a knife, 2 folding saws, one cheaper and one that's hopefully a little better, as well as a small hatchet and some canned food and an S-bit cooker. With the current dryness, an open fire cannot be risked here. So with this basic equipment and the place free of most of the clutter, I could start to get me some wood for a shelter. Instead of having to cut down living trees or bushes, why not use dead wood instead if it's scattered all around anyway? Close by, where a dense spruce forest was once located, a lot of trees have recently been cut down because of a spruce bark beetle calamity, a huge problem in Germany that has been worsened through the lack of rain. Both the little hatchet as well as the more expensive of the 2 saws work very well for what I'm doing here. But hey, these things are only 1 day old. It's a little too early to judge. I tried to find a number of straight pieces as well as a few branch forks that will come in handy later. After having prepared a bunch of branches, I wanted to return to the cabin. On my way back, I found more garbage though. This time bottles, cans, and Oreo wrapping. The writing on here is both German and French. The reason is that all this stuff was made in Switzerland. Someone apparently drove through Germany, parked in the forest, and tossed the garbage right into the bushes. I brought the garbage into the car to dispose of it properly. In fact, during my stay in Westphalia, I found garbage wherever roads would lead into the forest. These weren't hikers. In fact, I never really meet any hikers here anymore, since most forms of outdoor activities seem to circle around motor vehicles now. People park their cars here for a short rest, toss everything by the wayside, and leave. And if you hate littering just as much as me, you should check out my friend John Rowley's YouTube channel. He's from the southwest of England and a follower of this channel. And he produced this little animation film about littering, and maybe you can watch it, or better yet, show it to your kids. Make sure to leave a comment under his video and maybe tell him who sent you there. Back at the abandoned building, I was looking for materials. Some stones are scattered around, and if I had some mortar, I could maybe even rebuild some of the building. I also tried to salvage some of the nails from the old pallets, but after 20 years in the rain, they are just too corroded to be of any use. It became clear that I would be limited to branches and paracord. But at least some steel hooks and nails were also still protruding from the masonry, and it was enough to fasten a forked branch on the left side of the building. We will be able to use this as a support column for an inclined roof. On the right side, it would be much harder to achieve the same. I started by digging this narrow hole to insert one of the stronger branches here. At chest height, that branch was then tied to the damaged brick wall. I used different varieties of diagonal lashings throughout this project, and while my knots in general are far from great, they at least improved over the course of filming this video. Another long branch was placed on the wall horizontally and connected to both the wall and the other branches. In this hole inside one of the old stones, I placed another upright branch, fastening it with a piece of steel that I had also found in the rubble. Next, a diagonal was added. After that, I could begin to actually build the frame for the roof. Another long branch was installed, and now I could start to also add shorter branches in a 90-degree angle as an actual support for the top. When you connect two branches with each other, you can start by twisting the cord to form a timber hitch. You tighten the hitch and then you start wrapping it around both branches. After forming a cross like this, you go on in between the two poles, cinching the rope or cord into itself, and then in the end, a clove hitch can be used to secure everything. But as I said, I'm not particularly experienced in this field, so you better look for good lashings somewhere else. But hey, at least it's strong enough to do pull-ups, so I guess it should do the job for one night. And this is where that green net came into play again. I used it as a windbreaker and camouflage in one. Last but not least, the tarp was fastened to the frame that I had just finished. And it really took me a long time to build all this, and the sun was already starting to set, so it was time to prepare the shelter for the night. Hope that the Aspid cooker didn't dissolve too much of the plastic that these modern cans are coated with on the inside. Well, at least it doesn't taste like burned plastic to me. Famous last words. So as always, I hope that you enjoyed this episode. And if that was the case, then it is really important to me that you also give it a thumbs up. It might sound silly, but it really is a big part of what keeps me going. I need to see that what I'm doing here finds some resonance. No matter if I repair or build something or do something a little more experimental, these videos are always a tremendous amount of work, and without the filming process, everything would probably take less than half as long. And that's also why I need your support in this, and would be very happy if you'd consider making a donation via PayPal. A link for that is down under the video, or become a supporter on Patreon. under patreon.com/tpai. See you soon.
You've seen it yourself. Litter is everywhere.
Oh, conkers.
It has unpleasant consequences.